Hi everyone, this is Courtney. I hope everybody's having a great weekend. I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the Meadows reading and the systems diagrams that are in there because I saw there was a little bit of confusion. We're not going to spend an enormous amount of time on them or use them in great detail, but they are useful to understand and to think about as we talk about systems and how these systems affect other systems, etc. Probably the simplest one to talk about is the bathtub analogy that she used, which is this bottom diagram here. If you think about a bathtub, right, what's in the center here, you have water flowing in from a spigot. You turn on the spigot, you got water coming into the bathtub, and you have a drain. The water's going out of the bathtub. And this is, if you fill the bathtub, okay, you have a stock of water, the bathtub's full, you pull the stopper over X number of minutes, the water in that tub is going to drain. So it's a pretty steady decrease. And that's all this is representing. So you pull the stopper in the bathtub, that stock of water is going to decrease. Unless you turn back on the spigot. And what this is saying is you've pulled the stopper, the water has gone out, you turn on the spigot here, that water is going to stabilize. The volume or the stock of water in that bathtub is going to remain relatively constant as long as you have the stopper out and the flow running. So, and I know this is a very simplistic way of talking about it, but if you think about the systems that are feeding it and the systems that are pulling the stock out, you can maintain that stock. If you expand that thinking, though, to something like a water reservoir, so something, like a reservoir that's feeding water to a city, you have multiple inputs, so you have more than just a spigot, right? You've got multiple sources of water that are adding to the stock of water in that reservoir. You also have multiple outlets, so you have multiple ways that stock is being removed from the reservoir. So you have evaporation, you have discharge, you have different forms of water that are leaving. One of the challenges today is that a lot of these systems are very complex and they're problematic. And so, something as simple as a water in a reservoir. How do we maintain enough water in that reservoir when climate is changing, right? So we get these heavy rainfall events. You get a ton of water coming in, not just from river inflow, but something like urban runoff, where you have fairly polluted water coming into the water or into the reservoir. It might flood. It might be contaminated. It might, all of these systems are pretty complex. And you also have dry conditions where your evaporations are higher. You have a lot of discharge if you have a lot of users in that reservoir. So managing all of these systems to maintain the stock is challenging. And one of the things I drew this sort of feedback loop, this is that feedback loop, to say how do we take waste that's coming out of the system and feed it back into the system. So, there are opportunities to draw these feedback loops to maintain and sort of to close that system. So there's lots of complexity. I realize that this is a very simplistic way of talking about it. But think about it in terms of something a little bit more complex like nutrients, for example. Nutrients are coming, they're coming from the soil, they're coming from different sources into our food. They're leaving, we're eating the food. There's waste from the food. How do we start to close those loops and think about this more systemically in terms of how do we maintain those stocks? How do we sustain those stocks, especially in the light or in the face of very dramatic changes in a lot of the way these systems are operating and the context in which they're operating. So again, this is just a very basic overview of these systems, but just to get you thinking about how they're all connected. Again, don't get too bogged down in the diagrams, but just so you have a basic understanding.